All right, so I finally cleared this game. This is the 1-all, so beating the first loop. So we start off here by point blanking the starting enemies, because what it does is it allows me to build the hypermeter very quickly, and then, well, you blast the guys. um, yeah, it's difficult to explain everything that's going on, but basically the foundational mechanics are this hypermeter and the hits. So up on just above the little ships, especially when you use your laser and use the laser at a close proximity to the enemies, you build this meter, and then you get to use an extra powerful shot, which does more damage and cancels bullets. So here I'll use it very quickly, and you get invincibility frames, and using the invincibility frames I'm able to build the meter very quickly. So now I've recharged it all over again, and it basically trivializes this boss. And I have the hypermeter already built up, ready for the next level. So normally, if you're gonna play for score and try to gain as many points as possible, you would use your hyper very early here in order to rank to cancel, because every time you cancel a bullet, it drops a star, and that star counts towards your hit count in the left here. And ideally what you do is you build that hit count very early in the level, because you get a multiplier for enemies killed later in the level. Unfortunately, I'm not very good at this game, and so I don't do that. And now I'm instead saving my hyper for the second part of the level, because it's way trickier and a lot more bullets and a lot more enemies. And you'll see me collect little bees here, little bee icons that I reveal, and they're either gold or they're green. And the difference is when they're gold, they give you more points, but when they're green, they give you more hypermeter. So ideally, if I had been playing well, I would have a nearly full hypermeter coming into this, but instead now I have to point blank the boss and dodge a lot more than I otherwise would like to, which it's not tragic. It's not completely tragic, because it's not an overly complex pattern to get through, but it's not ideal. I popped the hyper here, even though it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because yeah, it makes this second half of the boss way easier, but now I don't have a hypermeter for the start of the third level. So it's a little bit of a decision as to like, what part of the level do you want to be do you want it to be difficult? You can either you can trade the early part of the next level to be easier, or the boss to be easier. I'm more consistent, I think, with getting through this part, this first half or the first third of this level without a hypermeter, especially because if you collect these two Bs when they're green, you get a hyper very quickly. But I failed to do that, so now we're gonna get in a really sticky spot here. That was not played ideally. It doesn't need to be that difficult, but I got lucky and got through it. Here, I generally try to stay up close to things, use my laser a lot. So, and you'll see I focus on the big ships because when they get destroyed, you get a bullet cancel and all the bullets on the screen disappear. Here, again, I don't know. It's a little bit of an aggressive hyper. It's not super hard to get through this, but I'm able to build another hyper pretty easily before the next part that I think it's important to have it live, which is around here. But again, I missed a B. So this area should be a lot easier than it was. Like I should have the hyper live before this mid boss comes onto the screen. So now these guys that shoot the pink bullets here, for whatever reason, they give you a fair amount of hypermeter. So I try to get very close to them and destroy them quickly and use my laser on the ground turrets and stuff in order to build the meters. And it's really important to get that B when it's green, or when it transitions from gold to green, it turns white, and you actually get the bonus points and the hypermeter at the same time. So here, it's really important that you don't get hit in that area and kill that turret with a bomb, because otherwise you don't get the 1-up. This was played okay. You can actually, if you route it correctly, you can pop your hyper before those two Bs, and then you come into the boss with the hyper already going, and you can trivialize a bunch of the first part of the boss. But it's not really a big deal because these patterns are not too difficult. Here it's just important to have the hyper, because now you can follow the boss, and she's shooting like missile things. And if you're hitting them with the hyper, you get a lot of hypermeter back, which means you can build the hyper for this second half or the last quarter. And this pattern, I'm pretty consistent at dodging, although I get hit there. But it's this here that this pattern is a nightmare to get through if you don't have a hyper. And ideally, you should be able to pop the hyper and get right up close and build the meter before you kill, before you get the kill. So now what happens here is now we still have the hypercharge going, coming into the start of the level, which is double-edged because, yeah, you get to have the hyper going, but there's a hyper rank mechanic. So every time you use your hyper, it increases the bullet speeds and the density of the bullets by some amount. And so coming into that level, I'm at a hyper level 4, and it won't drop until I pop another hyper. So you have to play the first bit of the level at a level hyper 4, which makes it substantially more difficult, but now we're at hyper level 1. So this isn't great. This wasn't very clean. And we're out of bombs. So if we get hit once more, you lose a life, which isn't great, because I generally aim to lose 0 lives before the 5th level, because the 5th level is so difficult. This pattern is pretty easy, but I drop it. But it was going to be unlikely that I get through this whole level without getting hit again. It gets pretty messy. So these purple lasers, you need to hit them with your own laser. So it's sort of like a Dragon Ball situation where you counter their lasers with your laser and you push them back. So the game plays a lot with they put a lot of pressure on you because you want to use your spread shot in order to kill all the popcorn enemies. But then there's the purple lasers that put a lot of pressure on you to use your laser, which makes your ship slower and your fire more concentrated. So I got clipped by the purple laser there, and it released a bomb. So it is possible to get through these areas without using a hyper, but it's pretty advanced. And again, if you were playing for score, you would build your hit count way early in the level and then just not use hypers for the last half of the level, which is very advanced play. And I'm not sure how I do it. How you would... Not even close to being consistent enough at that. So this isn't ideal. Ideally, you have a hyper already built up before you get to her, I think. Mostly because this pattern's whatever, it's pretty easy to get through. But here you can, if you could pop a hyper, do a lot of, like right now, use your iframes to get a lot of damage and build the next hyper, because these next patterns are really not fun to try to get through. So here again, so you can see the little ticks. There's 4 little ticks on my guy, which means I'm at a hyper level 4, and we're carrying this hyper over to the 5th level. And so we start the level at a hyper level 4. So it's going to be important that I build the next hyper as quickly as possible to be able to use it to drop the hyper level down to level 1 and lower the bullet speeds and density. Level 5 is basically a double level. Like, it's got by far the most complex patterns in the game, and it's an absolute nightmare. And I think it's like nearly twice as long as any other level. So yeah, it plays a lot with these lasers too. Like, there has these lasers coming on the sides, and if I was routing correctly, you're able to pop a hyper and destroy these turrets and get a lot of points on them. But I'm bad, so I don't. Unfortunately, again, I don't have my hyper here. So this is going to be more difficult than it needs to be. This pattern's not so bad, but what happens is now it starts speeding up. And with some practice, I'm sure you can get through it without having to use your hyper, but I'm not that practiced, so Ideally, I have the hyper going, and now there's this absolute mess of bullets you have to weave through, and I don't. So coming up here soon is a part that, or a part of the stage that the level is sort of known for, and it drives a lot of people crazy. It's actually, I think it's kind of a divisive part of the game, because these laser wheels, so like some of them shoot these like blue bullets, and then some of them shoot these lasers, and if you touch these turrets, it counts as a hit. So you have to weave between these turrets, as well as somehow dodge or route your hypers to not have so many of these, or to avoid the red and blue bullets, but also using your laser to counter the purple lasers. And it's very intricate. I obviously don't have my routing down at all, because it takes a ton of practice to get good at this. But obviously, if you're going to play at a high level and for score, well, you don't want to be getting hit ever. So dropping a life wasn't, I don't know, I was getting concerned that I might actually not be able to complete the game on a credit at this point. Somehow I didn't get hit there. Probably should have popped my hyper sooner. But that wasn't, like, getting hit there was actually really tragic, because now, like, it'd be really handy to have the hyper going and being able to cancel a ton of these bullets. So instead, I'm just gonna get a hit bunch. And it's just another one of these, like, so now we get another boss. So it's the only level of 2 mini bosses. I don't really know his patterns very well, so I just like aggressively use the hyper to be able to get through it. So we're on a hyper level 3 now, which it's getting dodgy, but we're getting through it. We have 2 bombs left. I think you get given a bomb up here soon, so it's not the end of the world. That was pretty clean. It's not as complex as it looks, but like what these games will tend to do is they put a lot of pressure on you to deal with a larger enemy while throwing a lot of popcorn sort of enemies at you. And it's pretty consistent with the Dodonpachi games and probably the cave or bullet hell games in general, because it stresses your attention in 2 different directions. So here you see me, like, I'll be redirecting a lot of bullets. I was basically just trying to hold on to the hyper as long as possible, because this spot is pretty tricksy. Because you have the purple lasers coming from above, and then a bunch of enemies coming from below. So you have to, like, use your laser to counter the enemies, but somehow we don't, oh no, we do get hit here. I don't know. It's, like I said, this is like at least a couple levels worth of complexity and length. So This is a throwback to their previous Dodonpachi game. That was pretty cool in the way that like I got up close to it and used the laser to point blank it, and so I did a lot more damage, and I was able to get the bullet cancel off before I got hit. So here again, I'm just trying to hold on to the hyper because now we're into the final boss. So we got 2 bombs, so we get 8 bombs total, and hypers. I mean, getting hit there was not ideal because it drops our hyper as well. So that wasn't great. But like, if you bomb manually, you get a lot more damage. And you'll see there like the bullets weren't canceling as readily on that hyper, and it's because we're at a hyper rank 5. So things are faster. But with this many bombs, this boss is actually trivial now. So now I'm just seeing if I can get through it without doing much for bombing. But there I just manual bombed and just the win is clear at this point. So yeah, first clear of a Dodonpachi game at all. Second clear of a cave game. This is supposed to be one of their easiest clears to get because of how many auto bombs you get. Normally, you have to bomb manually in order to, but hey, just because it's easier does not mean any cave game is easy. So, still pretty happy with it. There's a second loop. I didn't get the requirements to get the second loop. You either have to like use a minimum amount of bombs and lose at most 1 life, or collect all the bees in order to get to the second. And I don't even know where all the bees are in the 5th level, for example. There's a few bees that are quite tricky to get. So yeah, it's gonna be, and the second loop it's like the same thing except like at least twice as crazy. So gonna be a while before I'm able to pull a 2-all. Anyways, hope you enjoyed, and see you on the next one.